Hello, everyone. Tonight we are going to embark on a journey across the misty, moonlit waters of history, leaving behind the loud, frantic demands of the modern world. Picture yourself wrapped tightly in your favorite blanket, listening to the gentle, rhythmic lapping of waves against the wooden hull of an old ship as the cool night air settles around you. We are diving into a world where grand geopolitical ambitions and massive naval armadas are utterly derailed by the most mundane, domestic accidents imaginable. It is a comforting thought, really, knowing that while humanity likes to pretend it operates on grand philosophical principles, we are often just a collection of tired, slightly clumsy individuals wandering through the dark. Before we begin drifting down this historical river, remember that if you find yourself feeling deeply relaxed by our journey tonight, please subscribe to the channel, leave a positive rating, and write a gentle comment below to help others find their way to our quiet harbor. Now, take a deep breath, let your shoulders drop, and let us get straight to the story. You are standing on a wooden deck in the late 18th century, watching the stars reflect perfectly on the glassy surface of a quiet harbor. Everything is peaceful, yet beneath this tranquil surface lies the volatile reality of the Kettle War of 1784, an official historical event where the mighty Holy Roman Empire decided to flex its imperial muscles against the Republic of the Seven United Netherlands. The geopolitical stakes were supposedly massive, centering on the opening of the Scheldt River for imperial trade. But as you look closer at the flagship Louis, you realize the grand machinery of empire is highly dependent on the temperament of exhausted men working in cramped, smoky spaces. Humanity has an extraordinary capacity to build beautiful, towering warships, fill them with devastating cannons, and then let the entire enterprise be dictated by someone slipping on a wet plank while carrying dinner. It makes you realize that international diplomacy is often just a highly dressed-up version of an argument over who left the kitchen in a mess. Down in the galley of Louis, the atmosphere is heavy with the scent of boiling cabbage, salted beef, and thick, starchy broth. A tired cook, balancing against the gentle roll of the ship, lifts a massive iron pot of hot soup. This particular pot of soup represents an unusual piece of anecdotal information that survived the centuries, because it was not just any ordinary meal. It was a highly anticipated, thick vegetable broth meant to comfort a grumpy, sleep-deprived officer corps. In the dim lantern light, a sudden, unexpected lurch of the vessel causes the cook's boot to lose its grip. The heavy pot slips, tilting violently, and a massive wave of boiling, greasy broth cascades across the freshly scrubbed deck, splashing directly onto the boots of a tense guard. The chaos is immediate but entirely localized, a symphony of swearing, clattering iron, and the hissing steam of soup meeting damp wood. It is the kind of domestic disaster that happens in kitchens every single day. Yet because this kitchen happens to be floating on a weaponized platform of international defiance, the spilled soup becomes a catalyst for global drama.
You can almost feel the collective sigh of exhaustion from the crew as they realize they now have to clean the floor while navigating international waters. It is a beautiful reminder of how fragile our grandest structures truly are. We build empires, draw borders with golden ink, and write massive legal treaties, only to have the entire course of human history redirected because someone forgot to secure the kitchenware. Did the subsequent escalation occur as a premeditated act of political theater designed to force a conflict? Or was it truly the result of pure, unadulterated human stubbornness reacting to a wet floor in the middle of the night? If you think about it, this is the ultimate comfort for anyone who has ever dropped a plate or spilled a drink and felt like it was the end of the world. At least your clumsy moment did not require a formal report to the Emperor of Austria. As the greasy broth puddles near the cannon hatches, the immediate problem is not military strategy, but the fact that a dirty deck is a major safety hazard during a naval standoff. The crew begins rushing around with mops and buckets, their shadows dancing against the wooden walls in a frantic attempt to erase the culinary evidence before the captain notices. But across the narrow stretch of water, through the thick night mist, the watchful eyes of a Dutch patrol boat are staring directly at the frantic activity on Louis. To the sleepy,
hyper-vigilant Dutch sailors, the sudden, chaotic movement of lanterns, the shouting of commands, and the metallic clattering of iron pots on the Imperial flagship do not look like a kitchen accident at all. Through the distorting lens of wartime paranoia, a spilled dinner looks suspiciously like a crew rushing to their battle stations to load the cannons for a surprise attack. You see, this is where the relaxed sarcasm of history truly shines. The Dutch sailors did not have binoculars powerful enough to distinguish between a mop and a musket in the dark, so they assumed the worst. It is a classic human trait, isn't it? We see someone dropping their groceries and we immediately assume they are performing a ritual dance of defiance. The Dutch captain, awakened from a pleasant dream about cheese and tulip bulbs, rushes to his quarterdeck, his coat half-buttoned, squinting through the fog at the imperial vessel. The atmosphere thickens with a heavy, sleepy tension as both sides stare at each other across the quiet water, completely unaware that the fate of the region is currently balancing on a slippery puddle of vegetable broth. The oars are quiet, the sails are still, but the minds of the men are racing, projecting grand conspiracies onto a simple, clumsy kitchen blunder. You can let your own mind rest now, knowing that whatever mistakes you made today, you did not accidentally convince an entire foreign navy that a flying cabbage was a lethal weapon.
The heavy morning fog continues to roll over the water, blankets of gray mist obscuring the distant shoreline and wrapping everything in a quiet, insulated stillness. As you stand there on the damp deck, listening to the rhythmic creaking of the ropes, you can appreciate the strange reality of how geopolitical anxiety alters human perception. The underlying historical tensions between these two specific maritime powers had been simmering for decades, turning this particular stretch of water into a highly volatile powder keg looking for any spark. The Holy Roman Empire, under the ambitious but often erratic leadership of Emperor Joseph II, was determined to break the Dutch monopoly on the Scheldt River, an official historical event that had effectively choked the economic prosperity of Antwerp for over a century. The Dutch, fiercely protective of their treaty rights and commercial dominance, viewed every single imperial vessel not as a peaceful merchant trader, but as a direct existential threat to their sovereign wealth. When nations spend years looking for an excuse to launch their fleets, the universe eventually obliges with something deeply ridiculous. It is the ultimate manifestation of human stubbornness, where massive budgets are spent building towering walls of oak and iron, only for the entire apparatus to sit waiting for a clumsy cook to drop a ladle. An unusual piece of anecdotal information from local maritime journals reveals that the Dutch crew on the patrolling brig, the Dolphin, had been surviving on severely rationed salted herring and stale hardtack for 3 weeks straight, making them exceptionally grumpy and hypersensitive to any perceived slights from the well-provisioned Imperial flagship. When you are cold, damp, and haven't tasted a fresh vegetable in 21 days, your willingness to interpret a distant splash as an act of war increases dramatically. It makes you realize that grand imperial strategies are rarely executed by detached, rational minds. They are carried out by cold, hungry men who are utterly tired of looking at the sea. The imperial fleet believed they were executing a bold, progressive mission to open global trade, while the Dutch believed they were defending their homeland from imperial overreach. Did Emperor Joseph II actually expect the Dutch to fight over the river blockade? Or did he genuinely believe his massive diplomatic bluff would cause the Republic to collapse without a single shot being fired? This is the great academic parlor game of the region, trying to decide if the emperor was a misunderstood visionary trying to modernize European commerce, or just a royal contrarian who enjoyed causing administrative headaches for his neighbors. Either way, the sheer scale of the military mobilization on both sides stands in magnificent, hilarious contrast to the actual event that was about to unfold on the water. You can almost feel the weight of centuries of bureaucratic bickering pressing down on the harbor as the two vessels drift slightly closer in the current. The Dutch Republic had spent the better part of the 17th and 18th centuries fighting off global empires, developing a collective psychological hair-trigger when it came to their maritime borders. Every sailor on board the Dolphin had been raised on stories of heroic naval engagements, meaning they were practically desperate to find their own moment of glory,
even if that glory had to be extracted from a confusing situation involving a soup pot. Humanity has this fascinating, almost tragic habit of romanticizing conflict until a simple misunderstanding becomes a matter of supreme national honor. You can let a soft smile slide into your thoughts as you realize how absurdly serious we take ourselves, building massive forts and writing complex rules of engagement, all to justify our innate desire to have the last word in an argument. Across the water, the Imperial sailors on Lului are still completely oblivious to the panic they have caused. The cook is busy nursing his scalded thumb, cursing the slippery floor, while a few low-ranking deckhands casually throw the ruined cabbage leaves and greasy potato peelings over the side of the ship. To the Imperial crew, this is just a miserable start to a long shift. To the Dutch, those dark objects tumbling through the mist and hitting the water with a dull splash look exactly like the opening moves of an amphibious assault. The sheer lack of communication between the two ships creates a perfect vacuum of information, and as we all know, when humans are left in the dark, we don't naturally fill the void with peaceful thoughts. We fill it with plots, hidden agendas, and the absolute certainty that the other guy is trying to pull a fast one on us. As the morning light slowly begins to filter through the heavy clouds, turning the dark water into a pale, slate gray, the absolute absurdity of the situation becomes locked into place. No one is stepping back. No one is picking up a megaphone to ask what happened, because doing so would admit a lack of absolute certainty. And in the rigid world of 18th century naval etiquette, uncertainty is a sign of weakness. So, the captains remain on their respective decks, staring through their brass spyglasses, each waiting for the other to make the first definitive move. It is a beautifully slow-paced dance of pride and paranoia, an entire harbor frozen in time, waiting to see how a spilled dinner will be translated into the grand language of international law. You can close your eyes now and breathe in the cool, imaginary sea air, completely safe in the knowledge that your own daily misunderstandings will never require the movement of a multi-million-dollar naval armada.
The smell of the spilled cabbage soup begins to drift heavily across the damp, humid air of the galley, mingling with the scent of wet oak and sulfur from the nearby cannon hatches. As you watch the Imperial crew of Le Louis scramble to clean the greasy deck, you are witnessing the true, chaotic heartbeat of the ill-fated soup kitchen. This was not a kitchen designed for culinary artistry. It was a dark, cramped, low-ceiling space where a massive iron stove was constantly fighting against the erratic pitching of the sea. In the late 18th century, the galley of a premier naval vessel was essentially a floating furnace, a dangerous necessity where open fires were kept burning to feed hundreds of men. The cook, whose name has been lost to the footnotes of time, was attempting to prepare a traditional Austrian vegetable broth, an official historical event that took place during this tense standoff of 1784. The broth was meant to be the centerpiece of the crew's evening comfort, a thick, steaming liquid designed to ward off the biting chill of the North Sea mist. But feeding an empire on a moving platform is a recipe for disaster. An unusual piece of anecdotal information preserved in the naval logs reveals that the specific iron pot used on Le Louis lacked the standard stabilization brackets, meaning it was entirely at the mercy of the waves. When the ship hit a minor, unexpected swell caused by the changing tide, the boiling pot didn't just tip, it launched itself across the galley like a heavy, cast iron projectile. The resulting flood of hot broth, greasy lard, and half-cooked cabbage leaves didn't just ruin dinner. It created an instant, incredibly slick ice rink effect across the primary gun deck. Imperial sailors found themselves sliding across the wood, grabbing onto cannon ropes and hammock netting just to stay upright. It was a scene of pure, unadulterated slapstick comedy, occurring inside a multi-million-dollar instrument of global warfare. The immediate reaction of the ship's officers was not military panic, but a furious demand for a mop and bucket. Did the cook face a severe reprimand from the ship's cook corporal? Or did the captain simply blame the ship's navigator for hitting the wave too fast, creating a classic bureaucratic blame game that delayed the cleanup for nearly 20 crucial minutes? This delay allowed the grease to seep deep into the wood, ensuring that every time a sailor tried to walk near the portside cannons, they performed a frantic, involuntary dance to avoid breaking an ankle. It is the ultimate comfort for anyone who has ever had a disaster in the kitchen. At least your spilled soup didn't threaten to turn a flagship into a slip and slide for 100 heavily armed men. Through the narrow gun ports, the steam from the spilled soup began to billow outward into the cold morning air, creating a strange, localized fog bank that smelled distinctly of overcooked onions. Across the water, the Dutch patrol on the Dolphin watched this white cloud erupting from the sides of the imperial ship with growing alarm. In the 18th century, a sudden cloud of white smoke emerging from a warship's lower decks usually meant only one thing: the clearing of a cannon's touch hole prior to a full broadside attack. The Dutch sailors, already on edge, didn't sniff the air and think about lunch. Their brains immediately translated the onion-scented steam into the deadly smoke of burning gunpowder. It is a brilliant example of how human paranoia can take the most innocent domestic smell and turn it into an omen of absolute destruction. You can almost see the frantic activity inside the imperial galley intensifying as the cook tries to salvage what is left of the ingredients. A few bruised carrots and some salvaged salt pork are thrown back into a smaller pot, but the damage to the ship's morale has already been done. A hungry crew is a dangerous crew, and as the word spreads through the lower decks that dinner has been reduced to a greasy puddle, the mood on Les Louis turns sour. The men begin muttering, their complaints echoing through the wooden ribs of the ship, creating a low, rumbling undertone of frustration that the Dutch across the water mistake for the chanting of battle cries. Humanity has a fascinating ability to amplify its own minor discomforts until they sound like a declaration of global defiance to anyone listening from the outside. As the greasy soup continues to puddle around the wheels of the heavy cannons, the absolute absurdity of the situation reaches its peak. The imperial flagship is legally representing the absolute will of the Holy Roman Emperor, carrying the geopolitical weight of a continent, yet its immediate operational capacity has been completely paralyzed by a single bucket of vegetable broth. No one can move quickly, no one can carry a message without sliding, and the entire chain of command is temporarily focused on finding enough sawdust to absorb the grease. You can lean back into your pillows now, taking a slow, deep breath, completely safe in the knowledge that your own domestic accidents will never be viewed through a brass spyglass by a hostile foreign navy waiting to start a war. The strange, savory mist of boiling cabbage and onion continues to drift across the narrow channel, hanging low over the glassy water. As you watch the Dutch sailors on the Dolphin squinting through the gray morning fog, you are seeing the birth of the misinterpreted culinary insult. In the rigid, hypersensitive world of 18th century naval diplomacy, every single action, gesture, or object thrown overboard was weighed for its symbolic significance. The Dutch Republic had spent generations cultivating an intense, almost religious reverence for cleanliness and order, making them uniquely susceptible to a very specific kind of psychological provocation. When the imperial deckhands of Le Louis casually pushed the greasy remains of the ruined dinner through the scuppers, letting a thick stream of vegetable broth and floating cabbage leaves trail into the water, they believed they were simply discarding garbage. To the Dutch watchmen, however, this oily trail spreading across the harbor looked like a deliberate, highly offensive diplomatic declaration of defiance. To understand why a floating cabbage leaf could be seen as an insult to national sovereignty, you have to appreciate the profound cultural friction of the era. An unusual piece of anecdotal information from the port records of Antwerp reveals that the Dutch had recently issued a strict maritime decree banning all foreign vessels from polluting the shared waters of the Scheldt, viewing any disposal of waste as a direct violation of their territorial waters. When the oily slick from the imperial soup pot reached the hull of the Dolphin, coating the immaculate,
freshly painted wood with a layer of imperial kitchen grease, it was interpreted as a physical desecration of the Republic's honor. It wasn't just trash. To the Dutch captain, it was a weaponized culinary gesture designed to show complete contempt for Dutch authority. It is a beautiful example of how human pride can take a clumsy mistake and rewrite it into a calculated act of international disrespect. The Dutch officers stared at the floating vegetables with an absolute, stone-faced seriousness that would be terrifying if it weren't so utterly ridiculous. Did the Dutch captain genuinely believe the Imperial fleet was mocking his crew's meager rations by flaunting their discarded vegetables? Or did he simply use the oily water as a legally convenient pretext to justify a pre-planned military engagement? This remains a favorite topic of discussion among regional naval historians, who love to argue over whether the Kettle War was sparked by genuine geopolitical paranoia or an over-reliance on a strict maritime code of conduct. Either way, the image of a fully armed naval crew preparing their weapons because their ship's hull was touched by a floating carrot is the ultimate monument to human pettiness.
You can almost hear the low, rumbling murmur of indignation spreading through the Dutch crew as they look down at the tainted water. The modern mind looks at this and sees a silly misunderstanding, but to the 18th century sailor, honor was a tangible, fragile asset that had to be defended with lethal force. If a foreign ship dirtied your water, they were effectively telling you that you didn't own the river. Humanity has this incredible, highly exhausting talent for turning the most mundane items into symbols of supreme importance, transforming a discarded pot of broth into a historical boundary line that cannot be crossed. You can let out a slow, quiet breath into the darkness, deeply comforted by the fact that you will never have to defend the honor of your driveway because a neighbor's trash can tipped over. Across the water, the Imperial crew on Le Louis is completely oblivious to the cultural crime they have committed. The cook is still grumbling in the galley, attempting to scrape the remaining grease off the iron stove, while the deckhands have moved on to adjusting the rigging. They have no idea that their clumsy dinner disaster has just been elevated to the status of a major international incident. The complete absence of an open channel of communication means that neither side can clarify the situation. The Imperial crew thinks they are just having a bad day at sea, while the Dutch crew is entirely convinced they have been subjected to an unprovoked psychological assault by the Holy Roman Empire. As the sun tries to break through the heavy layers of overcast clouds, casting a pale, metallic light over the entire harbor, the stage is set for a completely absurd escalation. The Dutch captain steps up to his primary cannon, his hand resting on the cold iron, staring at the Imperial flagship with the grim determination of a man about to defend his country from a flying turnip. No one is laughing. No one sees the comedy, because everyone is trapped inside the rigid, unforgiving illusion of national prestige. You can close your eyes now and let the soothing rhythm of the imaginary waves wash over you, completely safe in the knowledge that your own daily misunderstandings will never result in a formal declaration of war over a spilled bowl of soup. The sudden shrill blast of a silver boatswain's whistle cuts through the dense morning air of the harbor, instantly shattering the fragile silence that had hung over the water. As you stand on the creaking timbers, you can feel the physical shift in atmosphere as small waves give way to raging tides of military panic. Within seconds, the illusion of a peaceful morning completely evaporates. Across the narrow channel, the Dutch crew of the Dolphin springs into a frenzy of highly disciplined movement. Lanterns are swung frantically along the decks, their amber beams slicing through the gray mist to signal a state of maximum readiness. Flags are run up the masts with a sharp, rhythmic snapping sound, their vibrant stripes of red, white, and blue unfolding against the pale sky to declare to the entire harbor that the Republic is officially prepared to defend its honor against the greasy provocations of the Imperial flagship. This is the chaotic moment where human communication completely breaks down,
and bad assumptions become locked into place like heavy iron gears. An unusual piece of anecdotal information from the personal diary of a midshipman on board reveals that the Dutch captain's hasty command to prepare for action was so loud and sudden that it caused the ship's mascot, a large orange tabby cat, to leap into the air and land directly on the head of the primary helmsman, briefly causing the vessel to veer sharply to the left. It is a hilarious reminder that while the grand historical narrative speaks of strategic maneuvers and geopolitical positioning, the actual physical execution of war often involves a confused sailor trying to untangle a frightened cat from his hair while trying not to crash into a sandbank. The immediate result of this nautical confusion is a classic domino effect of crossed signals. Seeing the Dutch patrol boat suddenly veer and begin running out its heavy brass cannons, the sleepy captain of Le Louis is shaken awake from his cabin, forced to make critical, split-second decisions with almost zero context. Was the sudden panic entirely avoidable? Or did the complete absence of a standardized international maritime signaling language guarantee that a dropped soup pot would be read as a declaration of total war? This open-ended question remains a source of endless fascination for naval scholars, who argue whether the entire kettle war could have been avoided if someone had simply possessed a basic megaphone to shout across the harbor that dinner was ruined.
Instead of clarity, the harbor is filled with the deep, echoing groans of wooden hulls turning against the current as both ships maneuver for the tactical upper hand. The Imperial sailors, their boots still sliding slightly on the lingering grease from the cook's morning disaster, scramble to their own battle stations. The sheer lack of communication means that every single movement by one ship is interpreted by the other as a direct, hostile preparation for a bloody broadside attack. Humanity has an extraordinary, highly exhausting talent for escalating a situation out of fear of looking weak, turning a minor kitchen accident into a high-stakes staring contest where the first person to blink risks losing their national pride. You can let a soft, slow breath escape into the quiet room, completely comforted by the fact that your own daily misunderstandings will never require you to load a 30-pound cannon in the dark. Through the narrow gaps of the wooden gun ports, you can see the dark, circular muzzles of the cannons slowly protruding from the sides of both vessels, their cold iron frames glistening with the morning dew. The tension in the air is so thick you could almost cut it with a galley knife, a heavy, suffocating stillness that always precedes the first mistake in a conflict. No one wants to fire first, yet everyone is terrified of being caught off guard by a surprise attack, creating a psychological feedback loop that amplifies the paranoia to an absolute fever pitch. Every creak of a rope, every splash of a wave, and every distant shout is instantly magnified by the men on board into a definitive sign that the enemy is about to pull the trigger. As the two warships continue their slow, majestic, and entirely ridiculous dance of defiance, the absolute absurdity of human behavior becomes beautifully clear. The entire machinery of two powerful nations, representing millions of citizens and thousands of miles of territory, is now completely enslaved to a misunderstanding that began with a slippery turnip. There is no grand strategy here, no brilliant military minds directing the chess pieces. There is only a collection of cold, tired, and deeply confused individuals trapped inside a rigid system of honor that doesn't allow them to just ask a simple question. You can close your eyes now, sinking deeper into the soft, warm embrace of your bed, utterly safe in the knowledge that you can sleep through the night without a single crossed signal disrupting the peaceful horizon of your world. The damp morning air slowly carries the heavy, thick scent of wet gunpowder and smoldering match lines across the harbor, blending with the lingering, faint aroma of the morning's ruined vegetable broth. As you stand on the slippery deck of La Lewis, watching the frantic crew throw handfuls of rough sawdust over the grease stains, you are looking directly at the bureaucracy of broadsides. In the 18th century, a naval vessel was not merely a floating fortress. It was a complex, highly regulated floating office building where every single action had to be recorded in triplicate on damp parchment paper. The Admiralty rules of the era dictated that once a vessel had officially beaten to quarters and run out its guns,
a rigid legal framework took over the chain of command, making it almost impossible for a captain to stand down without a formal, written explanation. This official historical event, the Kettle War of October 1784, was rapidly transforming from a simple kitchen blunder into a highly litigated international incident. The absolute rigidity of this naval bureaucracy meant that a clumsy accident in the galley was treated with the exact same legal seriousness as an armed invasion. An unusual piece of anecdotal information found in the logbooks of the Holy Roman Empire's naval treasury reveals that the captain of La Lewis spent the opening minutes of the standoff furiously filling out a standardized form for the unscheduled discharge of household greywater to legally account for the cabbage soup that had washed out of the scuppers and into the Dutch harbor. According to the strict military protocol of the time, if the spilled soup caused a diplomatic incident, the cost of the wasted ingredients would be deducted directly from the cook's monthly wages, unless it could be proven that the soup was lost due to an enemy maneuver. Did the absolute absurdity of these automated, unyielding regulations leave any room for common sense? Or did the legal system of the era fundamentally guarantee that any administrative spark would result in a military firestorm?
The tense, unyielding silence that has gripped the harbor for hours is suddenly broken by a deep, resonant boom that echoes off the distant rocky shoreline. As you stand on the sawdust-covered deck of Louis, the vibration ripples through the soles of your boots, a stark reminder that the first warning shots have officially been fired. In accordance with the rigorous naval protocols of the late 18th century, this opening gambit was not intended to tear through the oak hull of the Dutch ship, but rather to serve as a definitive, legally binding declaration of imperial intent. The single iron ball skips harmlessly across the glassy surface of the water, kicking up a succession of bright, white plumes of spray before sinking into the cold depths of the river. This singular, dramatic action solidified the Kettle War as an official historical event, transforming a chaotic domestic blunder into a physical exchange of military force that would be studied for centuries. The sheer absurdity of this opening skirmish lies in the magnificent mismatch between the scale of the weaponry and the actual damage inflicted. An unusual piece of anecdotal information recovered from the Imperial flagship's structural repair logs reveals that the only physical casualty of the entire naval engagement was a single, highly unfortunate iron kettle on the deck of La Louis. The Dutch return fire, aimed wide to avoid initiating a full-scale slaughter, managed to clip a secondary utility line on the Imperial vessel, causing a heavy rigging block to tumble downward and crush the replacement soup pot that the cook had just meticulously prepared. It is a delightfully ironic twist of historical fate, where an entire international conflict, mobilized by a dropped dinner, achieved its ultimate military climax by destroying the very kitchenware that started the argument in the first place. This circular comedy of errors left both crews staring at the fractured iron remnants of their evening meal. Was the entire battle a carefully orchestrated performance meant to fulfill the absolute minimum requirements of national honor without risking a catastrophic loss of life? Or did the complete breakdown of situational awareness mean that both captains were genuinely trying to hit each other and simply possessed terrible aim? This open-ended question continues to provide endless amusement for modern naval historians, who delight in examining how two heavily weaponized vessels managed to conclude an official international standoff with no human casualties and a single, obliterated cooking pot. It perfectly illustrates the enduring truth that human conflict, even at its most formal and structured, is never far removed from total, absolute absurdity. You can almost hear the collective sigh of relief from the exhausted sailors on both sides as the smoke slowly clears, revealing that the sky has not fallen and the ships are still entirely intact. The grand, terrifying illusion of war has been briefly maintained. The honor of both the Holy Roman Emperor and the Dutch Republic has been legally satisfied through the burning of gunpowder, and everyone can finally stop pretending they want to die for a floating potato peeling. Humanity has this fascinating, deeply ingrained need to perform these grand, destructive rituals just to prove a point, turning a simple lack of communication into a multi-million-dollar fireworks display that ultimately changes absolutely nothing about the world.
You can let a profound sense of peaceful, quiet amusement settle over your mind as you realize how completely safe you are from the ridiculous, high-stakes posturing of the ancient world. The rhythmic, gentle lapping of the harbor waves gradually reclaims the auditory space, washing away the echoes of the cannons and replacing the tension with a soft, slow, and deeply comforting stillness. The glowing matches are extinguished, the heavy iron guns are rolled back into their dark recesses, and the tired men of both fleets begin the slow process of securing the decks for the night. There are no more grand declarations to make, no more forms to fill out, and no more borders to defend. The Great Kettle Crisis has reached its natural, ridiculous conclusion, leaving behind only the fading smell of sulfur and the quiet realization that dinner is permanently canceled. As the pale twilight begins to drape itself over the narrow channel, blending the gray sky into the dark, silent water, the absolute peace of the harbor becomes absolute. The grand machinery of empires is winding down, the sails are being furled, and the long, exhausting day is finally coming to a close. You can close your eyes completely now, letting your thoughts drift away from the wooden decks and the iron cannons, allowing your mind to anchor itself firmly in the warm, undisturbed sanctuary of the present moment. Your own daily battles are over, the horizon is completely clear, and you are entirely free to let go of the world.
The quiet, misty harbor of history now begins to slowly recede from your mind. The heavy wooden hulls, the iron cannons, and the faint, ridiculous scent of cabbage soup drifting away into the soft twilight of memory. The turbulent, competitive waters of the 18th century are turning perfectly still, transforming into a calm, glassy lake of absolute peace and dark silence. You can feel the gentle, rhythmic motion of the ancient ship slowing down to a complete, restful halt, its heavy anchors dropping quietly into the soft mud of a forgotten, safe shore where no wars are fought and no grudges are kept. The long, exhausting arguments of mankind, the rigid rules of empires, and the clumsy mistakes of tired men are fading away into nothingness, leaving behind only the cool, refreshing night air and the deep, comforting embrace of your heavy blankets. Every muscle in your body is releasing its tension, sinking deeper and deeper into the soft support of your bed, as the slow, steady rhythm of the waves coaxes your mind into a state of total, undisturbed tranquility. There are no more cross signals to decipher, no more rules to follow, and no more horizons to watch. The harbor is completely quiet now, the world is at peace, and your journey for the night is beautifully complete. Sleep is coming to carry you away into the deep, dark wilderness of peaceful dreams. Rest now, let go of the day, and let the quiet history of the world rock you into a profound, healing slumber. Listen to the last, soft whisper of the fading tide as it leaves the shore. Good night.